Morning and welcome to WEG's second quarter 2025 earnings conference call. I would like to highlight that simultaneous translation is available on the platform through the interpretation button via the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. We would like to inform you that this conference call is being broadcasted, and after its conclusion, the audio will be available on our investor relations website. During the company's presentation, all participants will be on mute. Following the presentation, we'll begin the Q&A session. To ask a question, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen to join the queue. When announced, a request to unmute your mic will appear on your screen, and then you should turn on your mic to ask your question. If you have more than one question, we recommend that you ask them all at once. If you do not have time to answer all questions live, please feel free to send your questions to our email at ri@bag.net, and we will answer your questions after the conclusion of the conference call. We would like to emphasize that any forward-looking statements contained in this document or any statements that may be made during the conference call regarding future events, business outlook, operational and financial projections, goals, and WEG's potential future growth are merely the beliefs and expectations of WEG's management based on currently available information. These statements involve risks and uncertainties and therefore depend on circumstances that may or may not occur. Investors should understand that general economic conditions, industry conditions, and other operational factors could affect WEG's future performance and lead to results that will be materially different from those in the forward-looking statements. Joining us today from Jaraguá do Sul are André Luiz Rodrigues, Chief Administrative and Financial Officer, André Meneghetti Salgueiro, Finance and Investor Relations Officer, and Felipe Scopel Hoffman, Investor Relations Manager. Please, Mr. André Rodrigues, you may proceed. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you once again for WEG's earnings conference call. Let me begin with the highlights for the quarter on slide 3, where net operating revenue grew 10.1% compared to the second quarter 24. In Brazil, we had a positive performance in the solar generation business and continued delivery of transmission and distribution projects, despite slower overall growth due mainly to a significant drop in revenue from the wind generation business. Abroad, we saw another quarter of growth in the power generation, transmission, and distribution businesses, particularly in North America, along with a healthy level of industrial activity and higher sales of short-cycle equipment across key regions where we operate. Our operating results, measured by EBITDA, reached 2.3 billion reais, up 6.5% from 2Q24. EBITDA margin closed the quarter at 22.1%, remaining at a very healthy level. Along the presentation, André Salgueiro will provide you more details on these points. Return on invested capital, one of our key financial indicators, remained at a high level of 32.9%, as we'll see in more detail on the next slide. Revenue growth and operating margins in the period helped maintain return on invested capital at a high level, even though there was a decline compared to the same period last year. In addition to the increase in invested capital due to investments in fixed assets and acquisitions during the period, it's important to note that the second quarter 24 return on invested capital was positively impacted by the recognition of non-recurring tax incentives. Now I'll turn to André Salgueiro. Thanks, André. Good morning, everyone. On slide 5, I will go over revenue trends across our business areas. In Brazil, we saw a strong demand for low-voltage electric motors, spread across the various segments we serve. For serial automation equipment, demand fluctuated mainly due to high inventory levels at key clients. For long cycle equipment, such as medium voltage electric motors and automation panels, project delivered slowed down, reflecting a more cautious environment for large scale investments. In the GTD segment, despite lower wind projects revenues in 2025, we maintained a high volume of centralized solar generation project deliveries. Combined with solid performance in the T&D business, this contributed positively to the quarter. It's worth noting that excluding the wind generation business, all relevant segments posted double-digit growth this quarter. In the commercial motors and appliance segment, we maintained sales in line with the same period last year, with solid results in key sectors such as air conditioning and motor pumps manufacturers, although revenue in the washing machine segment declined. In coats and furnitures, demand remained strong, particularly in the water and sanitation and agricultural equipment segments. Abroad, industrial activity improved across all our main regions of operation, with solid performance in short cycle equipment such as electric motors and serial automation products. For long cycle equipment, we continue to see good demand in the oil and gas and water and sanitation sectors. However, the current global political and economic scenario has been impacting decision making for new investments. In GTD, we continue to benefit from opportunities in the T&D market in North America, despite a lower concentration of project deliveries this quarter. It's important to highlight that the T&D order backlog remains healthy and plants are running at full capacity. Generator business from Marathon in the United States and China also contributed to segment growth. In commercial motors and appliance, we saw revenue growth in several key regions, especially in China and North America. In coatings and varnishes, demand growth was mainly driven by the strong performance of our operations in Mexico, along with exports from Brazil to other Latin American countries. Slide 6 shows EBITDA evolution, which grew 6.5%, while EBITDA margin closed the quarter at 22.1%, improving compared to the first quarter 25 and slightly down versus the same period last year. This is mainly due to the change in the product mix, as well as the consolidation of acquired businesses during the period. Finally, on slide 7, we show the evolution of our investments, which totaled 583 million reais, with 63% allocated in Brazil and 37% abroad. In Brazil, we continue to modernize and expand T&D production capacity, as well as increase capacity and productivity gains in Jaraguá do Sul. Abroad, we are moving forward with investments in Mexico, particularly with the construction of a new transformer plant. That concludes my remarks, and I'll turn the floor back to André. On slide 8, before we move on to the Q&A session, I'd like to highlight the following. First, in May, we announced the acquisition of the assets of Heresite Protective Coatings, a US-based industrial coatings company founded in 1935. Heresite is well established in the industrial coatings market, with operations in the US and strong international presence. Last week, we also announced our continued and significant improvement in the FTSE4Good Index, one of the world's leading benchmarks for corporate sustainability performance. WEG has been part of the index since 2016, and this recognition reflects our ongoing efforts to foster sustainable business practices both within and outside the company. Finally, a few words on the outlook for the rest of the year. We continue to see healthy operational dynamics, and the product mix should keep supporting good operation margins. We remain confident in our strategy based on global presence, a diversified product portfolio, and operations across several segments. This allows us to respond quickly to changing scenarios and mitigate potential macroeconomic impacts. Lastly, it's essential to keep a close eye on the geopolitical and macroeconomic context, as shifts in this environment could affect business dynamics throughout the rest of the year. This concludes our presentation, and we can now proceed to the Q&A session. We'll now start the Q&A session. To ask a question, click on the raise hand icon to join the queue. If announced, a request to activate your mic will show up on your screen. Then you should enable audio to ask your question. We kindly ask you to make all questions at once.
Dando início, a nossa primeira pergunta vem do Rogério Araújo, Bank of America. Rogério, habilitaremos seu áudio para que você possa prosseguir. Pode prosseguir, por favor.
Oi, pessoal. Bom dia, obrigado pela oportunidade. Tenho duas aqui da minha parte. A primeira, eu gostaria de explorar um pouquinho mais o mercado de GTD lá fora. A gente entende que boa parte desse segmento vem de T&D e a gente está vendo um nível de receita em dólar orgânica. Primeiro, aí uns low teens aí por cento menor do que foi no quarto tri de 24 e subindo agora 2% no contra-ano só no segundo tri. Isso tem sido menor do que a gente tem visto em outras empresas globais no segmento de eletrificação. Contudo, quando a gente pega o lucro de T&D em Norte América, ele continua subindo, então mostra que pode estar havendo ainda algum aumento de preço incremental nas entregas. Isso nos leva a concluir que a gente pode estar vendo queda de volume, né, versus o quarto tri, e também menos crescimento do que peers globais. Faz sentido essa análise? Pode ser talvez uma questão de mix, pode ser uma questão do G, né, e expectativa para os próximos trimestres. Essa é a primeira pergunta. E a segunda é com relação a crescimento de receita. O eólico ele caiu bem lá no segundo semestre de 24, né, ao longo do terceiro e quarto tri, agora zerou. Como é que está essa base de comparação, tanto no terceiro quanto quarto tri? E somado com essa expectativa de solar centralizada caindo aí no segundo semestre, né, a gente pode ver ainda mais fraqueza de crescimento de GTD Brasil nos próximos dois tris, ou a base de comparação já está mais ajustada? Como é que vocês veem isso? E se eu puder mais um ponto de crescimento de receita, vocês falam no release de menos demanda de produtos de ciclo longo em industrials, tanto no Brasil quanto lá fora. Só que a gente não viu uma fraqueza de receita no segmento de industrials em nenhuma das regiões. Isso pode ser um indicador antecipado de menor crescimento nessa divisão, alguns trimestres à frente, ou não necessariamente? É isso. Muito obrigado.
Oi, Rogério. Bom dia, é o Salgueiro aqui. Obrigado pelas
Hi,
perguntas.
Rogério. Good morning. This is Salgueiro. Thanks for your questions. I'm going to start talking about GTD, the first part of your question. The first, it's important to mention that we have GTD in abroad with a high exposure of T&D, but we also have generation. So in mega numbers, we are talking about 75% for T&D and 35% is generation. When we see the performance in the last quarters, mainly, specifically the first and second quarter this year, we see performance that is very healthy in T&D, as we have been reporting for some time now, a full backlog. The plant is running at full operation, foreign operations full capacity too, and showing growth comparing to last year. In practice, that can change a bit from quarter to quarter depending on the level of deliveries that you have. So you might have some differences. It's natural in this kind of process. But when we look at T&D as a whole, the segment continues with a very good prospect for the year and growth for the year. What is happening and is somehow interfering in our performance is generation. generation had a weaker quarter in Q1, and we also saw the same dynamic in Q2. So we have some operations, especially in India, with our joint venture and also exports in Brazil that are running at a slightly lower level than the previous year. So consolidated numbers showed a decelerated growth. But basically, this is because of generation and some delays in T&D delivery. But again, this is going to be offset as we move on to the next quarters. As for the performance of GTD Brazil, indeed, we do have some important segments that are changing dynamics from one year to the other. Wind, as you mentioned, and we have been mentioning that since the end of last year that we wouldn't have a backlog for this year. And we take a look at the performance last year, it was a positive performance with higher concentration in the first quarter of the year. So the first and second quarters of last year were more relevant in terms of wind revenue. But then revenues started to go down as of the third quarter. So for wind generation, we should have a lower impact from now on. What I think it's important to mention is that we do have solar, and solar is picking up in terms of relevance in centralized generation as of the fourth quarter last year. So when we are looking at the fourth quarter this year, you're going to have a stronger base of a comparison for solar, but not as much for wind. The uh, the third and fourth quarter, sorry, had a slower comparison base. And finally, when you talked about long cycle internationally or overall in electric and electronic industrial equipment, we have seen some fluctuation in revenues. But I would say that the most relevant impact, or at least the signs that we are having, is basically our backlog. And I think that, with the new tariffs and geopolitical discussions, this is being a bit impacted, especially when people think of new projects. So we do see a deceleration, but overall, uh, short cycles continue very positive. When you think of electronic industrial equipment, foreign market for the second quarter of the year, we did see a significant improvement compared to Q1. So it is more concentrated on long-term projects, and we have to see what happens in the coming days. Very clear answers. Thank you very much.
Continuando, a nossa próxima pergunta
Moving
vem do
on,
Lucas
our
Laghi,
next question
também
comes
aqui
from
do
Lucas Laghi from
abrirei seu
XP.
áudio para que você possa
Mr.
prosseguir.
Laghi,
Pode prosseguir, por favor.
you may go on. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking my question. I'd like also to touch some points with regards to revenue and a follow-up on the previous question. Organic growth first. If you remove the effect of acquisitions and we adjust for FX, we do see a deceleration. It's 1% year on year, excluding the effects, if I'm not mistaken, with the greatest impact from wind. But just to try and understand the prospects for the future. First, North America, and even thinking of the results of the competition, we do see a strong backlog, especially for motion equipment, short cycle equipment. But what draws our attention is this difference of short cycle and long cycle equipment. Generally, short cycle equipment decelerates before than long cycles. And we see just the opposite. So for North America, what do you think can explain this difference? Is it any movement of pre-buy for short cycle equipment, uh, just expecting the tariffs to escalate? Or how do you see in July these new orders for these two categories, again, in this context of higher tariffs? Just to understand if this difference of performance, because generally it's the opposite. Short cycle it starts to decelerate before. And TND, we understand that the capacity is full, so occupancy is very high. But given that the last orders came to your backlog with in a context of lower supply, we would expect higher prices as you start billing these orders. So thinking of revenue growth, can you consider an acceleration for the second half or in 2026 for TNT, even with a low idle capacity, or should we see that more in 2025 when the new capacities in Mexico and the US start operations? So basically, short cycle, long cycle, United in North America, and then thinking of acceleration or deceleration of revenues for the future. Okay, Lucas, thanks for your questions. Well, as we did mention in Q1, we did feel an accommodation of revenues in North America, but we were seeing a prospect for an improvement in orders for short cycle. So what we are seeing is an opportunity in this process. We have to remember that short cycle, you have a visibility of portfolio of your backlog for 2, 3 months. So we do see an improvement in the coming of orders, but we don't know if this is going to be sustainable along the year. So we do have a better prospect than Q1 for short cycles, but long cycle, this is very much related to what André Sangueiro mentioned. It has to do with geopolitical uncertainties and tariffs. So we'll have to follow from close what's going on. When we talk about TNT, this is something that we have also been saying, is that abroad we see a certain price accommodation. So we are not working with a scenario of raising prices. I think prices are already at a high level, and we prefer to be a bit on the ground this time, focus on the deliveries that we have in our backlog. I think the main challenge of TNT for WEG today and for the coming quarters, especially in 2026, is to deliver as fast as possible the capacity that we are building and developing. Uh, uh, Eliminate bottlenecks in the United States, Mexico, Brazil. So the capacity will start to be delivered along 2026, and everything goes right. The expectation is for the beginning of 2025 to 7 to close with all this investment cycle. Remember, in the last two WEG days, we announced the volume of investments of TND. And in 2027, we are going to double the production capacity compared to what we had in 24. So I think that's it. I think that's the main challenge of ours, to move faster, to have capacity, and really enjoy this extraordinary moment in the market. And this is also what we have been saying. We are operating at full capacity uh, with our current facilities, and in T&D, except there is a difference in the price composition, we are going to have a lower growth rate until the capacity increase is finished. Okay, very good, André. Thank you very much.
A próxima pergunta vem
Our
do
next
Lucas
question
Marquiori.
comes from Lucas Marchiori from
Lucas,
BTG.
seu áudio.
Mr. Marchiori, you may go on.
E aí, pessoal, bom dia. Minha
Thank
pergunta é
you,
mais
everyone. Good morning. My
sobre a
question
tarifa, né? Então, primeiro,
is
assim, vocês
more with
poderiam
regards to
talvez quantificar
tariffs.
para a gente
Could you
esse efeito
quantify
de tarifa no
the
Q2,
impact of
pelas novas
tariffs in
tarifas que começaram
Q2,
a ser
at
aplicadas
least
ao longo do
the
Q2,
tariffs
quando,
that
né, a gente
started
chegou um pouco no
to
aumento,
be applied in Q2. So what did you have in terms of extra costs because of tariffs? We understand that WEG US imports most of the problems, I believe, products. I think this is an internal cost. And also hear from you about your plan. We are eventually at the verge of a drastic increase in tariffs. This is a relevant shock to the business. So, what do you have in terms of mitigating factor to try and deal with that? Perhaps, I don't know, produce more in Mexico, ramp up capacity in the US. And when I say tariffs, I'm not talking only about import tariffs, but also tariffs on copper. So basically, that's it. Hi, Lucas. This is André Rodrigues again. The increase of 10% that we had along the second quarter didn't show a large impact because we did make some price adjustment in the North American market to offset that. So the impact on our results was not significant. What is most important is to look into the future, the second part of your question. To start answering your question, I think it's very important to say that right now it's very difficult to have a firm position because of all the uncertainty and volatility in the commercial structures that are being discussed. But given the current situation, WEG has an action plan that can mitigate some of these impacts. I think it's very important to highlight that first, we have global industrial presence, and along the last years, we have been accelerating the amount of investments in production capacity in different geographies where we operate. And now, because we started doing that way back, that can help us in this process. Just for everyone to be on the same page, today in produce in Brazil a bit less than one third of what we sell to the US. And most of it are electric motors because transformers, for instance, are that are produced in Brazil, the main market is not the US, it's basically Brazil and the neighboring countries. So what we have today is basically the following. We may relocate export routes. For instance, we can use Brazil to meet the local demand in Mexico and use the production of Mexico to meet the demand in the American market. That can take us some months, but after the change is real, we believe we can mitigate some of this impact. And it's also important to mention that the scenario depends on the level of tariffs of other countries. Today, we are considering the scenario that Brazil is suffering the highest level of tariffs, but we have to assess that. Today, it's very difficult because we don't know if other movements are going to happen. But the idea is to continue monitoring market conditions and, as we did the first time, assess the commercial strategy and the price of our products. But again, it's important to remember that the local American market depends on the import of finished products and supplies. And we see already an increase in price in that market. So it's very important to highlight that WEG in the first Trump administration did already have an action plan. The discussion at the time was again the tariffs. We had a very structured plan, what we would do to mitigate if something came a bit stronger in Mexico a few years ago. And today we are at a much better position, industrially speaking, to have the flexibility to relocate export chains. And in terms of copper, we still do not have a position of what the increase is going to be. Thank you, André. Good morning, everyone. Our next question comes from Jens Spiess from Morgan Stanley. Mr. Spiess, you may go on.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my question. So I was just delving into the previous questions. about the lower growth of GTD and TND in particular in the external markets, more specifically in North America. You mentioned that you don't foresee any relevant price increases for TND, which means that, as you already mentioned, capacity growth will be key for revenue growth going forward. So I was just trying to figure out how capacity, the progression of capacity increases will evolve in the North American region for TND. Is it 15%? Is it 10? How will it happen in, I don't know, for the rest of this year, 2026, 2027? So very interesting to understand that. Obviously, I know there are a lot of uncertainties, but any guidance would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Jens, obrigado pela
Hi,
pergunta.
Jens. Thanks for your question. I'm going to continue speaking Portuguese so that we can have the simultaneous translation. But as for TND in North America, and you asked about product prices. When we talk about TND, most of it, especially in North America, are more long cycle products, and pricing happens project by project. So I think the comment of André Rodrigues, when we see a plateau of prices, I would say that the prices is somewhat stable at a higher level for some time now. But when we take a look at the backlog that we are performing today, transformers that are being delivered today were sold 1 year, 8 months ago. So as time progresses, we do have some increase in prices that are going to be seen. But again, as we are seeing this price stable for some time, the increase is going to be less relevant from now on. So we are going to have some increase, but less relevant than previous years, just to make it clear. As for production capacity, the number that we released for TND, considering all the investments, inclusively those in Brazil, is that we want to double TND capacity to serve all geographies in which we operate, based on the capacity that we had in the end of 23-24, and the capacity that we are going to have as of the first quarter of 27. Part of this capacity has already been added in Brazil and Mexico, and now the second important time is going to happen next year. So that's why André Rodrigues mentioned that the expectation for 26 in terms of new volumes is a bit lower than what we added in previous years. We are going to have, as of the end of 26 and beginning of 27, then a new increase in capacity. And then we're going to have growth again because of this capacity. Now we are at full capacity. The plants are full, the backlog is full, and we have that until the end of 26.
Perfect. Thank you. So we can assume that capacity growth will again accelerate in 2027 relative to 2026. Is that correct? Just to be clear. Thank you.
Sim, sim, está correto.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. As of 27.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dando continuidade, a nossa próxima
Moving
pergunta.
on, our next question comes from Jonathan Koutras from JP Morgan. Mr. Koutras, you may go on. Good morning, André Salgueiro. I have just one question. If you could give me an update about the idle capacity that you have, especially for the second quarter, and if you see any gap in your EBITDA margin, if the margin is at the double-digit level. Thank you. Hi, Jonathan. This is André Rodrigues. We have to separate, and you're asking specifically about Meriton. Remember, Meriton, we have low voltage motors and we have the generators. Low voltage, we are more or less at this capacity that you mentioned, a bit lower than the acquisition, but in generators, we are running at full capacity. We are expecting for the end of September the first investment to increase our production capacity in generators in North America and a new cycle of investments given the demand and the new orders for this product. Again, very much connected to generative artificial intelligence, the building of data centers. You need redundancy and therefore you need generators. So, on one hand, we are moving forward to have a higher number of orders in low volt motors, but for generators, the more capacity in the short term, the better. Because as I mentioned, by the end of September, the idea is to have a new level of capacity and in 26 new investments to continue growing in generators in North America. Now, when you talk about margin gains and integration, well, the plan is going on as planned. This is a long-term journey. It will take us some time. I think what we could capture in the short term has been done. Synergy, the buying of inputs, back office for North America has also been completed in the second quarter, and now the teams are working to reevaluate our portfolio, see if it's possible to standardize components and also increase capacity for the production of components so that we have a higher verticalization for marathon businesses that will impact the business for the future. Very clear. Thank you very much, André. Our next question comes from João Friso from Goldman Sachs. Mr. Friso, you may go on. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking my questions. I have two. The first is a bit more related to the big picture. You mentioned that long cycle, both in Brazil and abroad, for electric industrial motors is being impacted by a more uncertain scenario abroad and higher interest rates here. I would like to know how this impacts your target of 26 to grow double digits, because I know this has always been your target. Because in the end of the day, you have a lower long cycle, so you are projecting lower revenue for the coming years. So I would like to hear from you and also about margins. We did see an evolution of EBITDA margins quarter on quarter. Could you break down this margin to say how much is owed to a lower share of solar, an increase of prices, anticipating tariffs? Because we know this is one of the movements that we saw in different peers abroad. So just for you to understand, to elaborate on these movements. Hi, João. Thanks for your questions. As for expected growth for 26, I think it's still a bit early for us to comment on that. We have our budget that is generally designed in October, November of the year, and we still have a lot to be changed. When we talk about industrial long cycle, the lead time is not that long. You're talking about an order that we can have today or in the coming months, and that would already generate revenues for the next year. So that will depend a lot on the new orders coming on from here on, and this is connected in Brazil and abroad to different reasons that can change along the year. So we have to monitor that and have our budget more towards the end of the year for us to have a bit more clarity for next year. consolidated numbers, we also have other businesses, other initiatives, and then we go back to diversification of WEG. Because remember, when one part of the business is not doing so well, we see growth in other parts of the business. And we have mentioned that for some time, synchronous compensators. We are having a very healthy order with a good backlog for next year. Even electric mobility gaining a bit more momentum for electric buses, powertrain, and also the BESS business that somehow we did even have a higher expectation for this year because of the action that was delayed for next year. But we are seeing orders of smaller orders coming in, and we do have an expectation that this business is going to contribute positively to our growth. So we have to follow all these variables, but more towards the end of the year, I think we are going to have a bit more clarity to understand the performance of next year, and then we are going to share the information with you. You know, and we always say that we do not have our objective is to grow at double-digit levels. As for the margin of the quarter, there were very many moving parts. It's very hard to say the one thing. It's a bit of everything that you said. Um, we have two aspects about mix. One, well, if you consider the first quarter, this is basically solar. Solar was lower in the second quarter compared to the last year. We also have the wind. And we have all the other effects of the other businesses. So eventually, we are talking about price adjustments outside, uh, abroad, other factors, and better dynamics in terms of demand for short cycle products, especially in the foreign market.
Maravilha, André, brigadão. Super claro.
Thank you, André. Very clear.
Próxima pergunta vem de
Our
Gabriel
next question
Rezende,
comes
Itaú
from
BBA.
Gabriel Rezende
Gabriel,
from
ligue seu áudio.
Itaú BBA.
Pode prosseguir, por
Mr.
favor.
Rezende, you may go on.
Oi, pessoal. Desculpa, consegue me ouvir agora?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear
Sim,
me?
Gabriel, pode prosseguir, por favor.
Yes, Gabriel, go ahead.
Queria só voltar aqui na discussão
I would just like
sobre
to
a dinâmica tarifária.
go back to the
A gente
tariff
tem uma conversa frequente
dynamics.
entre vocês
We
no
have a
Brasil,
joke that
e
some
vocês voltaram
competitors of
a
yours
crescer
in
sempre nos
Brazil
Estados Unidos, né? Principalmente
are
ali
very much
na
oriented
frente
to
das transidoras.
exports
Então, só queria
in the
entender
US,
se
especially for
eventualmente a gente poderia
transformers.
esperar que
I
esse
would
cenário
like
competitivo
to
em alguns
understand
segmentos
if a
específicos mudasse um
competitive
pouco
scenario in
no
some
Brasil, talvez
specific
pensando no caso
segments,
dos transformadores
especially for
o que
transformers in
você entende que
Brazil,
poderia proteger a
would
WEG
be a problem.
se
What
esse
could
cenário competitivo
protect
de fato
WEG
piorar.
if
E
this
segundo ponto,
competitive scenario
gostaria de voltar um pouquinho, né?
deteriorates?
A gente acabou de
And the
discutir
second point,
margem
we
aqui, a gente
just
falou bastante
discussed
sobre os
margins
transformadores
here.
lá
We
fora,
talked about the
mas
price
dentro
of
dessa competição,
transformers abroad. Could you
vocês e os competidores têm
mention
feito
how
em
you
relação a
and the
repasse
competition
desse
has been
é,
behaving in
elemento de
terms of
financiamento
pass-through
para
of
as outras
prices
segmentos além de
abroad,
transformadores? Obrigado.
and also for other products other than transformers? Thank you very much.
Oi, Gabriel. Voltando então, obrigado pela
Hi,
pergunta.
Gabriel. Thanks for your
Vamos lá,
questions.
né? Como é que
Okay.
funciona, sobretudo o mercado de transformadores
So, how does this
de grandes
transformer, large transformer market operates? How our competitors based in Brazil are focused on? Because these are the products that they are exporting to the US.
basicamente, pelo que a gente
Basically,
entende,
from
todos
what
estão
we see,
somados aí, né, com contratos
is that they
matéria-prima,
all have
principalmente
contracts,
nos planejamentos de
raw
produção
material. They
para
are already under
2027.
production plannings
A
for
gente
27.
não está vendo uma mudança
So we
aqui
do not see a change in this dynamics, not for the short term, even up to 27, because that has already been ordered under contract. So WEG is going to continue its strategy to serve the markets in regions close to these markets, as we have in Brazil, as we are increasing capacity in Colombia, in Mexico, in the US, and we can even rethink that a bit longer. But we do not see a scenario, not in the short term, where we are going to have a drastic change in the process of rerouting exports to the Brazilian market. And if I understood your question in terms of the prices of transformers, this is a bit of what we mentioned before. We do see a situation in which we are not working with additional price increases compared to prices today, because I think prices are already well adjusted. And if we have a higher price in some geographies, you can even give room to new entrants. So the market is operating at good prices. Margins for WEGs and components are very suitable. So we do not see a change in that. Very clear. If you could talk about other products abroad, especially for motors, we saw the competition talking about good prices in the last time quarter. Do you also see a healthy dynamics? Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention the motors. We not WEG and the other competitors did adjust prices because of tariffs in the North American market, but not in other markets. Okay, thank you very much.
A próxima pergunta vem
Our
de
next
André
question
Mazini,
comes from
do time.
André
André,
Mazzini
você está
from
no áudio?
Citi.
Pode prosseguir, por favor.
You may go on.
Bom dia, time.
Good
Obrigado
morning, everyone.
Então, um
Thanks for
follow-up
taking my
sobre
question. I just have a
que o
follow-up
André fez
on the
sobre
comments
os
of
compensadores
André
síncronos, né?
about the
Pergunta
synchronous
se após a quebra na
compensators.
Península Ibérica, que
After the
muitos
blackout that we
estabeleceu
had in
a
Spain and
falta de
Portugal,
compensadores síncronos naquele grid,
basically
de
because
fato
of
estão vendo
probably the lack of
elevar a
synchronous
energia, né? E
compensators
isso
there,
pode, né,
are you
levar para
seeing
uma mudança.
an increase in
E ontem no
demand?
call da Evernova,
And
disse muito
yesterday, in
também
the call of
que os compensadores
Nova,
síncronos
they
teriam um mercado
talked
de
about
5
the
bilhões de
market
dólares
of
por
synchronous
ano, porque
compensators
é
would
uma
be
demanda
of
gigantesca que eles estão.
$5 billion. I
E
don't know
eles
if
têm um
they're
modo de
talking
vender de
about
compensadores síncronos na
uh,
Arábia Saudita, que é
the
a
whole world,
Iberdrola
and there was an
regulamenta.
increase
Então, se
also
isso
in
for
Saudi
possível,
Arabia.
talvez globalize, né? Se
So,
vocês
could you talk about this
acompanham esse
market
mérito
if you
e
are
previsão de participarem desse bid que a Evernova
in
acabou
Saudi
de
Arabia,
compensadores
if
síncronos
you
na
were
Arábia
part
Saudita?
of the bid
Eles
for
vão querer
the
ter
synchronous
energia limpa até 2030, né? Porque esse
compensators
mundo
because
vai
they
ser
want to
muito
have clean
poluído.
energy until
Essa é a primeira.
2030 and they
E a
need the
segunda
product.
sobre
So,
os
this is the first
desdobramentos,
question. And
né?
then
Especialmente
about
a gasolina
domestic
caiu 300
GTD.
milhões de reais
The line had
e parece
a
que
drop of
tem muita coisa
600
solar
million
acontecendo
reals, and I
até o
think
fim
there
do
is
ano
a
que vai
lot
subir
of
a
solar
mais de
to
300 milhões de reais. Já
leave.
tem esse solar
And
vindo já
so I would like
e
to know how much in the solar has
para o fim
already
do ano. Obrigado.
uh, an impact in the margin for the end of the year. Thank you.
Obrigado pelas perguntas.
Hi, Mazzini. Thanks for
No
your
mercado de
questions.
compensador síncrono,
Well,
né, de
the
compensador,
synchronous compensator market or synchronous
já se
condenser market,
estabelecia
this is
desde o
something that we
contexto
have been talking for some
de
time now.
mais
And
renováveis
it is
no grid,
connected
né?
to
A gente
this
está falando
idea of
tanto
more
de eólica,
renewable
nuclear,
energy in the
eólica,
grid.
mas também
And
tem
here
a
we're talking about
tecnologia
wind,
que traz uma
solar,
estabilidade, uma
and
estabilidade
energy
para o grid.
storage.
E uma das
That
formas
brings
que você tem de
stability to the
reduzir
grid.
isso é através da
And
gestão
a
compensadora
way
que utiliza os
to
compensadores
work with
síncronos, né?
that is the
Então, a gente
synchronous
já há um
compensators
tempo
or condensers.
vinha
So
percebendo,
for
né, uma
some
maior
time,
demanda
we
por
realized a
compensadores,
greater
porque
increase
a
for
gente
this
também tem um
product.
portfólio há bastante
Remember,
tempo,
this is a product that
mas
WEG
na
has
prática
had in its portfolio for some time
teve
now.
essa
But
necessidade
in
do mercado
practice, the
bastante
market
flutuação.
demand
Por exemplo,
has
as
been
renováveis,
increasing
o
a
exemplo que
lot
você deu,
in recent years,
das
especially because of
compensações aí em
renewable energy
mercados, né,
and also the
Europa,
problem that you
Portugal
mentioned
principalmente, tem
in
esse problema
Spain
e
and
eu
Portugal.
acho que a gente vai
So this is a
cada
problem
vez
that
mais,
people have, and
ligados
more
a
we are
esse
going to
quadro
see
de compensação,
investments
né?
connected
Hoje a
to
gente já
that
tem
in
bastante
several
empresas de
regions in the world.
compensadores bastante
Today, we have a backlog for the synchronous condensers that are very healthy. These are projects not only in Brazil. We do have projects in Brazil, but also we are selling to Portugal, the United States, and Chile. In Chile, this is a project that we have a partnership with Alupart that we already announced to the market. So it is a heated market, and we have positive expectations for the remainder of the year and for the coming years, especially considering that for the next auction, transmission T&D auction, part of it is going to be of synchronous condensers in Brazil, which should help the market develop even more in Brazil. But it is, as I mentioned, we do see good opportunities also in other markets where WEG is present. As for GTD in Brazil, compared to last year, we did have a drop in revenue, 1.5%. I think here it's very important to say that the drop is basically because of wind. And we did mention that in the beginning of our presentation. If you exclude wind from the comparison base of GTD Brazil, we would have grown more than 20%. So we did have a concentration of wind in the second quarter and lower revenue this year because what we have this year is maintenance operations. We are not selling new machines. As for the performance of the first quarter, the greatest effect was solar because we had a higher concentration of centralized solar farms in the first quarter, with good performance in the second quarter, but below the level of the second quarter 24. Very good, Salgueiro. Thanks a lot. Our next question comes from Alberto Valério from UBS. Mr. Valério, you may go on. Good morning, Salgueiro, Rodrigues. Thanks for taking my question. I would like to ask a question more about your balance sheet, and you can have the follow-up later on. You don't have to answer now. But it's basically R&D. This line went up year on year uh, uh, at about 3% of the revenue. So if you could give us a bit more color on this line, and if you capitalize part of this line and how. And second, about net equity, there was a change also. You had some accrued numbers to the company's capital. So why of the change? So these are my two questions. Hi, Alberto. This is Salgueiro. Thanks for your questions. Well, research and development, the 3% that you mentioned, is basically our usual number, which is generally 2.5 to 3%. So perhaps there was a slight increase this year, but I don't have all details here. I can then get back to you for a better follow-up. But nothing really comes to mind. We continue with investments for the development of new products, and this is what we have been doing regularly along the years. As for the change in net equity, that was an increase in capital that we had in the beginning of the year. And then basically, we have an accounting issue that the profit reserve cannot be above the capital stock. So when it gets when it gets close to this number, then we decided to have the capital increase. But this is something that happened along the first quarter, basically a transfer of this line to capital stock. Okay, very clear. Thank you very much. We are now closing the Q&A session. Remember that if you have any questions, please feel free to send our questions to our email, ri@weg.net. André Rodrigues, your mic is open for your final remarks. I would like to thank you all for joining us in our earnings conference call for the second quarter. And again, we would like to once again invite you for our WEG Day 2025 in Jaraguá do Sul on the 3rd of October. I hope to see you in Jaraguá on the 3rd. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. WEG's conference call is now concluded. We thank you all for attending and wish you an excellent day.